Bold predictions rolls on. I knew what was coming today, but I walked in the office and I didn't want to say anything because I wanted to see which production executive or maybe just outright producer or director around here was going to come up to me. And you know who it was? It was Zach. Production executive Zach came up to me and said, why don't we just call this Bold Predictions X7? Because WrestleMania 17 was called WrestleMania X7 instead of the classical Roman numerals. And you know what? I'm going to allow it. Why not? Bold Predictions X7, or as you might call it, Chapter 17 tonight. These are things that you claim you would bet your own money on, and we are rolling really deep at this point. There is some extreme boldness tonight. I'm going to try not to laugh because you deserve to be taken seriously. This first one, we could see it happen, okay? We've talked about this. So the first one is from Suffering Tennessee fan, and he/she, they, to be safe, say, Tennessee finally beats Alabama after 16 years, and I get to remove the suffering part out of my name. Also, side note, the last time we beat Bama, I was 2 years old. Some quick math tells me that you are a legal adult now. If you were 2 years old the last time Tennessee beat Alabama, that would have been 2006. And I put this at an 8. This is not the boldest thing in the world. It's pretty bold. We've got a point spread already on this game. So if you wanted to go bet this game right now, you could. You could go to, well, depending on your sports book of choice, you could go there and probably get Alabama or Tennessee, if you want to bet Tennessee, plus 13.5 or plus 14. The line's hovering around 2 touchdowns. The game's at Neyland, and if you're going to play Bama, where would you rather have them than coming off back-to-back games at Arkansas and against Texas A&M? If you believe in the whole body blow theory in college sports and college football, which you should, it matters, it's a real thing, even for teams as deep as Alabama, yeah, that's when you want to get them. Now, it's not the easiest week before for Tennessee because I think they're at LSU. So both of these teams are going to be coming off pretty physical games. But imagine Tennessee being 5-0, which is the scenario that selfishly a lot of us around here are thinking about because selfishly, you know, this is one of my favorite rivalry names, third Saturday in October. And I, of course, have never been in the building when Tennessee won this game. I've been at the game many times, never seen Tennessee win the game. I don't even need them to win it. I would just like to see them, for spectacles purposes, be undefeated when we arrive at the game. What would that take? It would take a win on the road against Pitt, which could happen, and it would take a win against Florida in week 4, could happen, and then it would take a win on the road at LSU. Now, any one of those are possible, if not likely to happen. Are all 3 of them capable of happening? Percentage-wise, I wouldn't put it at 50-50, but I wouldn't put it at 3 either. So, you know, somewhere in between there, it's possible. Tennessee beating Alabama, though, I'm going to put it at an 8. It's still fairly bold, but notice it's not a 10. So, hey, things are looking up in Knoxville. Next up, this one's really bold. I'm going to go ahead and tell you what my boldness scale on this is. It's a 9.5. Grayson said the national championship game will feature 2 teams that have never been to the playoff before. So I had producer Jesse do you a favor, and me, and I had him compile a quick list of the teams that have been to the playoff. A lot of them you could rattle off. You, of course, know about Ohio State and Bama, Clemson, Georgia, Oklahoma, Notre Dame. Yeah, you remember them. How many people off the top of their head remember that Oregon was in the first playoff back in 2014? Florida State was in the first playoff. They played each other, actually, in 2014. Michigan State's been there. Washington's been there. Cincy, Michigan. So those are the teams that have been there. Therefore, they do not qualify for this. The prediction is both teams in the national title game will be newbies, fresh blood when it comes to the playoff. So, Jesse, show me some teams we could be talking about here. We could be talking about A&M. USC has yet to taste that playoff. Utah, Wisconsin, Texas, Oklahoma State, always a sleeper there. Baylor, last year's Big 12 champ, they haven't been there yet. Florida, Iowa, Pitt, Miami, Penn State. So these are some of the teams we're talking about. Look at that list, or think about it if you're listening on podcast. Do you see USC versus Baylor? Do you see A&M versus Pitt? What about Miami versus Oklahoma State? Do you see some combination of these teams, or a team that has even longer odds to play for a national championship? Do you see that this year? I don't. So this is a 9.5 for me. And I'll tell you, you may think back to as recently as this past year, 2021, and you may say, this is not that bold, Josh, because remember, 2 of the 4 teams in the playoff this past year were newbies. Michigan, Cincinnati, they were new. So it almost happened, didn't it? No, it didn't almost happen. Michigan got splattered, as did Cincinnati, and therefore you realize how different the challenge is making the playoff versus playing for the national title. Oh, you could get there now. You can navigate your way there. Winning once you get there, and in this case, needing 2 new blood teams to win when they get there, that is a much taller task. So I'm calling that a 9.5. This next one's really bold. Let's go to the ACC. Jameson said, Clemson has the same disappointing year this year as last year. They do not make the ACC Championship. This is an 8 for me. I would be moderately stunned if Clemson did not at least play for the ACC Championship. But notice I didn't say 10. I only said 8. They are the overwhelming odds-on favorite to win the ACC. In this case, I just need them to play for the conference championship. But what have we seen in years past? And how would Clemson's hopes and dreams get derailed this year if that were to come to pass? Well, easily, it would be the same way that they got derailed last year. We've seen this before. We've seen teams waste good to great defensive performances because they couldn't score if their life depended on it. Remember last year, Clemson lost 2 games, so everyone looks back and they remember 10-2, or I guess 11-2 if they won the bowl game, which I think they did. So I don't want to draw your attention to the 2 losses. What I want to do is illustrate to you how close it was to being worse. There goes the pop of the paper. You know, they had wins against teams like Georgia Tech and Boston College and Syracuse and Louisville. Those 4 wins were by 1 possession, guys. And in some of those cases, they didn't even top 20 points. So those were close games. One bounce of a ball here or there changes the outcome in those games, and they beat FSU by 10. So they lost 2 games last year. They had another 4 games that were 1 possession, 5 games that were 10 points or less. And I say that to say if they have not improved offensively, a significant margin this year, all of a sudden, if you look at this year's schedule, yeah, your eyes automatically go to the game against Wake Forest or against NC State. But if they can't score, if they haven't improved, if they're not more versatile and explosive in the pass game, Louisville's in play, at Notre Dame certainly in play, Syracuse is in play, at Florida State's in play, at Boston College, South Carolina at the end of the year, Miami. My point is, if they don't make the ACC championship game, period, it will no doubt be because they had the same problems as last year. Their over-under win total is 10.5. So if you believe that they're going to have those problems, there you go. And in fact, they're even giving you a little leniency on the juice to the under. It's only minus 105. If you believe that Clemson will struggle again, there's some pretty easy money on the board. Because here's a spoiler. If they do have the same problems they had last year, not to mention if they're even more pronounced because of whatever you think the result's going to be of losing both coordinators, they will not win more than 10.5 games. So they're either going to be completely overhauled this year and it's a non-issue, or they will finish 10-2 or worse again. I happen to believe they will play for the ACC Championship, so I'm going to call that an 8. This next one is comfortably in 9 territory. How about this? Try this one on for size out there. Minnesota will go 11-1. They're going to win the Big Ten West. They will take Ohio State to the wire in the conference championship game before losing. With Kirk Soraka back, Tanner Morgan at quarterback, Chris Autman-Bell and Dylan Wright, they're going to tear up the Big Ten. Respectfully, I don't believe that. So I'm calling this a 9.3 on the boldness scale, our first ever 9.3. Let's discuss preseason odds for just a second. To give you a clear understanding of what's being predicted here, here are the Big Ten West odds. Wisconsin, Nebraska, Iowa, Purdue, and then there's Minnesota there. They have the 5th best odds to win this division. So our prediction of 11-1 and Big Ten West champs, if you believe that, and the rules here are you would be willing to bet your money on it, you're going to be pretty rich come December if it does pan out, because they are very, very long shots to do this right now. One loss here, 11-1, means that at Michigan State, at Penn State, Purdue, at Nebraska, Iowa, at Wisconsin, we're navigating all that with just one loss. It sure would be one of the biggest stories in college football. I get the whole Tanner Morgan being reconnected with his old offensive coordinator, Kirk Soraka. I get all that. But here's what else I get. They had that before and were never able to come close to 11-1. And secondly, their offensive and defensive lines got pretty decimated, and they are relying on a lot of transfer help there. And if all of those pieces don't pan out, or much less if there's injury that comes into play, they can't come close to this. Most good teams can't come close to this. And by good, I mean preseason top 15. It is hard in a Power 5 conference to finish 11-1. So I'm going to call this a 9.3 on the boldness scale. Last, for tonight, but not least, Michael said LSU will make a New Year's Six bowl game. We never lacked talent except at the coaching level, and now we have that. What a world we live in, where you can justifiably, my bad, refer to your former coach as not being talented, and the guy won a national championship. It's fascinating. I'm going to call this an 8. I think a lot of you think it's more bold because their over-under win total is 7. So how in the world are they about to make a New Year's Six game? Well, part of it is out of LSU's hands. See, Ole Miss, whether you remember this or not, Ole Miss played in a New Year's Six bowl game last year. They played in the Sugar Bowl. How did that happen? Well, you had to have two things come together. The first, Ole Miss had to overachieve, which they did. But then the second thing that was even more important is you had to have two teams from the SEC in the playoff. So Bama was there, Georgia was there. Well, what does that do? That takes two teams that would normally be taking up spots from your conference in those New Year's Six games, and it redirects them, which means they have to dive to the number 3 seed or the number 4 seed or whatever the case may be to fill out the allotment for the SEC in the New Year's Six game. So if LSU ended up being this year's Ole Miss, if they're a 9-win team or a 10-win team or something like that, even if one of the losses is to Alabama, that's okay. If Bama and Georgia were in the playoff again, then whoever that surprise team is, whoever that 3rd place, 4th place team, however that shakes out, whichever teams are there, they're the ones contending for and competing for a spot that otherwise would not have been open if your conference teams didn't make the playoff. So because that is out there as a lingering possibility, even though it's a fringe possibility, I'm going to call this an 8. You've got depth, which we talked about a lot tonight. It's going to creep in as an issue for LSU this year. Schedule, just because of the division they play in, is an issue. And growing pains. You know, for everyone who looks at the problems you had under Ed Orgeron, but those same people being happy that Brian Kelly's in the house, well, why are you happy? You would tell me yourself you're happy because Brian Kelly has a different way of doing things. That's true. I'm not telling you don't be excited about that, but I am saying as far as 2022 is concerned, that means by default, there are some guys in that program that were getting away with things in the past that the new guy's not going to let them get away with. And sometimes that's not the smoothest transition in the world. So growing pains is always an issue when you're flipping culturally as well as flipping your coaching staff roster, and they've got some guys they lost to the portal. I mean, Eli Ricks should be on this team. He's not. He's playing for Alabama. Not to mention losing some of those other guys in the secondary. We do not know who's going to start at quarterback for LSU yet. So anyway, I'm saying all that to say there's a world where this happens, but it would require some help elsewhere and them to win some games that they're not expected to win this year.